Imagine this, it's 2 a.m. You're alone in your workplace, the fluorescent lights flicker weakly, and the silence is almost palpable. Every creak, every rustle seems amplified in the darkness. Even though you know there's probably no one else there, you can't shake the feeling of a presence. A faint draft brushes your neck, and your instinct tells you to turn around, but what if it's not just your imagination? This is the kind of sensation those of us who work the night shift know all too well. The hours drag on, and what usually seems harmless in the daylight takes on a completely different form when the sun has set. Exhausted and alert, our minds start playing tricks. But what happens when those moments of doubt feel too real to dismiss? Over the years, I've heard countless stories. Tales that send chills down your spine. Some come from security guards in hospitals, others from employees at remote gas stations. Workers like you and me, who have encountered something they can't easily explain. I've always been drawn to these stories, not for the thrill, but for what they reveal about us. Why does the night shift seem to awaken our deepest fears? Maybe it's the solitude, the darkness, or the simple fact that, at these hours, reality seems to blur, leaving us vulnerable to the unknown. In this video, I invite you to delve into some of these stories. Don't worry, they're not just ghost stories. These are real accounts from real people, and while some can be explained away rationally, others might make you question everything you know about the world around you. Because, in the end, what's more unsettling, a ghost you can't see, or the corners of your own mind you can't control? Join me as we uncover the truths behind these long, lonely nights where the ordinary mingles with the inexplicable. First story, The Night Guardian. Let me share a story with you, one recounted by a close friend of mine whose routine was as monotonous as it was unsettling. He worked as a security guard at an old hospital, one of those places with a history longer than anyone would care to remember. You know the type, buildings heavy with an almost tangible energy, where the walls have witnessed more than they should, and where, as the rumors go, the spirits of past patients sometimes linger. This friend, whom I'll call Juan, worked a shift from 10 at night to 6 in the morning. 8 hours of wandering through empty hallways, listening to the echo of his own footsteps in the long corridors. For most, it might seem like an uneventful job, but Juan always said that something changed in the hospital when the clock struck 3. It was as if the building itself came to life, where something much more sinister began to stir in the shadows. Initially, everything seemed normal. The hospital at night was just a quiet, somewhat unsettling place, but nothing that his flashlight and routine couldn't handle. However, there was one part of the hospital Juan dreaded patrolling, the old psychiatric wing. This section had been closed off decades ago, but for some reason, guards were still required to check it, just to make sure no one sneaks in, the supervisors would say. The first time one entered the wing, he noticed something odd. Everything was in a state of complete disrepair. Rusty beds covered in dust, torn old curtains, and the walls, well, the walls seemed to scream stories you'd rather not hear. Around 3:30 in the morning during one of his rounds, he heard something unexpected, a soft knocking, as if someone were knocking on a door. The strange thing was that the sound didn't come from any of the main entrances but from a room at the end of the hall. Initially, he thought it was some old pipe or maybe the wind, but as he approached, the knocking grew more insistent, as if someone were waiting for him to open the door. Of course, Juan wasn't going to ignore it. Despite the growing unease, he headed toward the source of the noise, flashlight in hand. When he reached the door of the room, the knocking stopped. The silence that followed was even more disturbing, as Juan was convinced he wasn't alone. He turned the doorknob, and with a creak that echoed through the hallway, he opened the door. Inside, the room was empty. No one was there. No sign that anyone had been there. But the feeling of being watched didn't disappear. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something move. It wasn't a person, at least not in the way we recognize them. He described it as a shadow, an indistinct figure moving in the darkest corner of the room. Juan blinked, and in that instant, the shadow vanished. But the cold in the room lingered, as if the presence was still there, watching him from a place his eyes couldn't reach. That night, Juan left the wing as quickly as he could. He tried to convince himself it was just his imagination, the result of exhaustion after so many hours of work. The next day, during his break, he tried to rationalize what he had seen. Maybe it was a shadow cast from somewhere, an optical illusion, or just the effects of fatigue. Yet, a part of him couldn't stop thinking about what really happened in that room. Interestingly, after that night, the knocking became a regular occurrence. Every time Juan passed through that part of the hospital around 3 in the morning, he heard the same sound. Always coming from the end of the hall, always from the same room. But what was most unsettling wasn't the noise, it was the figure. Sometimes, as he walked past the slightly ajar door, he swore he saw the shadow peeking out, as if waiting for him. And every time he tried to open the door again, the room was empty, but the air inside felt dense, heavy, as if something invisible occupied the space. One night, curiosity, or perhaps desperation, led him to confide in one of the older nurses about what he had been experiencing. The nurse, with a serious look, told him he wasn't the first to report such phenomena in that wing. According to him, years ago, when the psychiatric section was still operational, there was a patient in that very room who, every night, would knock on the door, asking to be let out. At first, the doctors ignored him, but over time his behavior became more erratic until one night, he simply stopped knocking. They found him dead in his bed one night, around 3 in the morning. Since then, many of the guards who had worked at the hospital reported hearing the same knocking, always at the same hour, always in the same room. And while some attributed it to old pipes or drafts, one couldn't shake the image of the shadow he had seen. Because unlike others, he had felt more than just a noise. He had felt a presence that, according to him, hadn't found peace. After that conversation, Juan began to avoid that part of the hospital. He'd find excuses to skip that area on his rounds or simply bypass it. Yet, every time he passed nearby, his heart would race, and he couldn't help but listen, even from a distance, to that same knocking. When he shared this story with me, I could see in his eyes that, although he tried to appear skeptical, something within him hadn't overcome what he had seen or felt in that hospital. And while we may never know for certain what was haunting that old psychiatric wing, Juan left me with a lesson. Sometimes, it's not what you see that scares you, but what you can't explain, what stays with you long after the experience has ended. Second story, the gas station on the deserted road. This story was told to me by a young woman named Carla. She worked at a small gas station located on a remote road, one of those that seems to fade from the map. Only a few cars passed by during the day, but at night, the place turned into a real desert. Carla worked the night shift, from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., alone. And although it seemed like a boring, routine job at first, everything changed one night when she started to notice something strange. It all began on one of those nights when nothing much happened. The clock struck 2:30 a.m., and Carla was behind the counter, flipping through an old magazine to pass the time. Suddenly, she heard the familiar sound of a car approaching. It's rare to see anyone at that hour, but not unusual. She looked out the window and saw an old car, a black sedan that seemed from another era. The car stopped next to one of the pumps, but no one got out. Carla watched it for a moment, waiting for the driver to get out. They didn't. After a few minutes, she decided to go out and attend to the customer. When she opened the door, the cold night air enveloped her, and a shiver ran down her spine. She approached the car, but when she got to it, the vehicle was empty. There was no one inside, no sign of any passengers. The car was there, unmoving, but there were no signs of life. Carla, a bit puzzled, decided to go back inside the store. Maybe the driver had gone to the bathroom or just stepped away for a moment. However, what was unsettling was that when she returned to the counter, the car had vanished. She hadn't heard the engine start or the lights turn on. It was simply gone. She thought maybe she hadn't paid enough attention, or that it was a very quiet car, though deep down, she knew that didn't make sense. The next night, at exactly the same time, the same car appeared again. This time, Carla decided not to go out. She watched from the window, with her heart racing, and waited again for someone to get out. But, just like the previous night, nothing happened. The car remained parked for a few minutes and then, without warning, vanished. No sound of tires on gravel, no flash of brake lights. It simply disappeared as if it had never been there. Carla started to feel uneasy. She asked one of her coworkers if they had seen anything strange in the previous nights, but no one else seemed to have noticed anything unusual. They told her that the lonely road often played tricks on people, that accumulated fatigue could make you see things that weren't there. Carla tried to convince herself of that, but there was something about the coldness of those encounters that kept disturbing her. Over the following weeks, the car kept appearing, always at the same time. 2:30 a.m. sharp. Regardless of whether there were customers or not, the car would show up for a few minutes, with no one getting out or approaching the store. Carla decided she had to find out more. Maybe the car belonged to someone who had lived nearby or someone who frequented the gas station before she started working there. But the more she investigated, the more questions arose. One night, she decided to take a bolder approach. When the car appeared again, she went outside with a flashlight in hand. The air was cold, colder than usual for that time of year, and there was an eerie silence, as if the world had stopped moving. She approached the car, and just like before, it was empty. However, something was different this time. When she looked inside the car, she saw something on the passenger seat. It was an old photograph, faded and wrinkled. It showed a young man standing next to a car very similar to the one in front of her. Fear gripped her, but so did curiosity. She carefully took the photo and went back to the store. The next day, she brought it with her and showed it to an older woman who used to frequent the gas station during the day, someone who had lived in the area all her life. The woman looked at the photo for a long moment and then said something that left Carla frozen. "That man died in an accident over 20 years ago, right on that road. He was driving late at night, and his car went off the road. They found him in a ditch, not far from here. They say his car still shows up at night sometimes, as if his soul is trapped, repeating his last journey." Carla felt her blood run cold. She had heard ghost stories but had never believed in them. Until now. She decided she couldn't ignore what was happening. From then on, every time the car appeared, she simply watched it from the window, trying not to let panic take over. Weeks passed, and although she never saw the driver again, the car continued to appear, faithful to its nightly appointment. One night, however, something changed. The car appeared, as usual, but this time the lights were on, and inside, the figure of a man could be vaguely seen in the driver's seat. Carla felt a lump in her throat. It was impossible. The man she had seen in the photo, or at least his shadow, was there, sitting, looking ahead, as if waiting for something. Carla closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, the car, along with the figure, had vanished. That was the last time she saw the car. From that night on, it never appeared again, and Carla never found any sign of what had happened. But the experience marked her forever. Although people kept telling her it was just her imagination, that maybe she was too tired or that the loneliness of the road had affected her mind, Carla knew what she had seen. She knew there was something beyond this world, something she couldn't explain with words. Since then, Carla avoids driving on that road at night, even when she's not working. She feels there's something in that stretch of asphalt, something that doesn't want to be disturbed, something that keeps repeating its last journey, trapped in time. Third story, the museum watchman. When I heard the story of Miguel, the museum watchman, I knew I had to share it. Miguel worked at an art museum in a small but historic city, a place filled with valuable pieces and, as he would soon discover, unexpected mysteries. The museum was located in an old building, once an aristocratic mansion before being converted into an exhibition space. Such buildings, with their mix of history and art, are often a breeding ground for legends and inexplicable phenomena. Miguel had taken the night shift to cover for a coworker. At first, he thought the night would be like any other, quiet and uneventful. He walked through the empty galleries, shadows dancing on the walls as his footsteps echoed through the deserted halls. Everything seemed normal, except for a persistent feeling that he wasn't alone. It was a sensation that grew as the night wore on, as if someone or something was watching him. On the first night, Miguel noticed something odd in the sculpture hall. It was a relatively small gallery but filled with marble and bronze statues, some of which had an unsettling intensity in their expressions. Miguel was doing his usual rounds when, suddenly, he realized that one of the statues seemed to have changed position. The statue in question was a bronze figure of a man, with a stern expression. When Miguel entered the room, the statue was facing a different direction than it had been during his last visit. Initially, he thought it was an illusion, an effect of the light or perspective. However, as the night progressed, the movement repeated. The statue seemed to change position during each round he made. What started as an annoyance turned into an unsettling phenomenon. Miguel decided to keep a detailed log of the situation. As the night wore on, he documented every time the statue seemed to move. He was determined to find a logical explanation for what he was experiencing. However, the changes in position were subtle, barely perceptible, and he couldn't find an obvious cause. On the second night he worked, Miguel decided to bring a camera to try to capture some evidence. The museum's security camera was meant to record significant events, not to monitor statues, but he thought it might help. He set up the camera in front of the statue and prepared to review the footage at the end of his shift. When he reviewed the footage, he saw something he hadn't expected. During the night, not only did the statue appear to move, but there was also a shadow sliding across the floor, sometimes approaching the statue and other times moving away. Miguel was puzzled. There was no visible intruder in the footage, but the shadow seemed to have a life of its own. When he was in the room, the shadow seemed to move at its own pace, as if it had its own consciousness. It was as if the shadow was interacting with the statue, guiding it, moving it, changing its orientation. Miguel decided to talk to the museum director the next day, but the director didn't seem too surprised. He told Miguel that the building had a long history and that some of the older employees had spoken of similar phenomena. The director told him that, in the past, there had been a legend about the sculptor who had created that particular statue. It was said that he was an artist obsessed with capturing the essence of life in his work, so much so that, according to the legend, his soul was trapped in his sculptures. Rumors indicated that the sculptor had died tragically, and some believed his spirit still lingered in the museum, guiding his creations. The story left Miguel more unsettled than before. However, he decided he had to face his fears. On his next shift, he decided to spend more time in the sculpture hall, hoping to observe more phenomena. He braced himself and prepared to confront the unknown. As the night progressed, he noticed that the atmosphere in the sculpture hall was heavier. The air seemed denser, and the feeling of being watched became almost oppressive. At one point, Miguel saw the shadow moving more pronouncedly. This time, it wasn't just interacting with the statue, a human-shaped figure seemed to form on the floor. The figure moved slowly, as if dancing or performing some kind of ritual. Miguel felt his heart race. He couldn't deny what he was seeing. The shadow seemed to have a defined shape, and its movements were intentional, as if telling a story with its dance. He decided to approach cautiously, trying not to interrupt the scene. The shadowy figure seemed to turn toward him, as if aware of his presence. At that moment, he felt a wave of cold wash over him, as if he were enveloped in a frozen mist. The figure slowly faded away, and the room returned to calm. The statue remained in the same position he had last seen it. Miguel didn't know how to process what he had experienced. He decided that, from then on, he would continue doing his job with greater caution and respect for the unknown. Although he never saw the shadow in the same way again, the experience left a deep impression on him. He had witnessed something that couldn't be easily explained, something that seemed to be beyond the mundane. Miguel's story became one of those urban legends among the museum staff, a story shared in whispers and cautious glances. The museum remained open, and people continued to admire the sculptures, but few knew the mystery hidden in the shadows. Miguel, for his part, continued working there, although the atmosphere of the place had changed for him irreversibly. He knew what he had seen was real, even if he couldn't fully explain it. In the end, Miguel's story reminds us that sometimes, even ordinary objects, like a bronze statue in a gallery, can hide stories and presences we don't fully understand. Museums, with their air of antiquity and mystery, are often the stage for inexplicable phenomena. Perhaps, in the darkness of the night, the objects we admire are alive in a way we can't see during the day. Or perhaps, there is simply something in the history of places that leaves a deeper mark than we imagine. The reflection on these stories beautifully encapsulates the essence of our exploration into the unknown. Each narrative, while distinct in setting and characters, converges on a common theme, the intersection of the real and the supernatural, and how these experiences challenge and enrich our understanding of reality. The story of Juan, the night guard at the hospital, delves into how historical settings can heighten our perceptions and blur the lines between reality and imagination. His experiences illustrate how our surroundings can influence our sense of reality, turning ordinary events into profound encounters with the unknown. Carla's tale at the isolated gas station confronts the notion of places being haunted by their pasts, where the boundaries between life and death seem to blur. Her encounter with the repeated car and shadowy figure speaks to the possibility of souls trapped in a cycle, hinting at a deeper connection between personal history and unexplained phenomena. Miguel's experience in the museum explores the idea that art and antiques can carry more than just their physical presence. The moving statue and shadow in his story suggest that objects imbued with history might harbor energies or presences that reveal themselves in mysterious ways. These stories collectively highlight that the boundaries between the mundane and the mystical are often more fluid than we realize. They challenge us to question our perceptions, to remain open to the possibility that there are dimensions of reality beyond our understanding, and to find meaning in exploring these unexplained aspects of our world. Reflecting on these tales encourages us to consider our own experiences and beliefs about the supernatural. Whether through personal encounters or shared stories, we navigate a world filled with mysteries that push us to explore, question, and seek deeper understanding. Thank you for engaging in this exploration of the inexplicable. I'd love to hear your thoughts on which story impacted you the most, or if you have any similar experiences you'd like to share. Each story adds to our collective understanding and connects us through our shared curiosity and wonder. As we part ways, may you continue to embrace the mysteries around you with curiosity and courage. The unknown holds endless possibilities, and every story is a doorway to new realms of exploration. Until our next adventure together, keep seeking and finding meaning in the hidden corners of your own life.